You can join us with the flag salute, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, roll call, please.
Please note for the record, all council members are present.
Okay. Adoption of tonight's agenda.
Move adoption. We'd like to close in memory of our city worker who unexpectedly passed away, Donnie McClydman. I guess he was also a citizen here at one point.
Yes.
Okay, second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
Mr. Mayor? Question was asked earlier, I don't know if the answer got back to the council, as to whether you can resume your workshop after the regular meeting. I don't have a problem with that as long as you announce it at the beginning of the meeting. That's what you intend to do.
Yes, that's what we do intend to do.
Okay.
Okay. So we've got adoption of tonight's agenda. Oral communications. Caroline, since you're the only one in the audience, would you like to speak on something that's not on tonight's agenda? You don't have to. We can keep moving along.
Twist their arm.
I suppose. I'm Carolyn Parker, and I'm on the Planning Commission, and we have decided that someone from the Planning Commission should come to the City Council meetings, and we think this would be the date to start. So I'm here representing the Planning Commission. We think this is something we need to do, especially in the upcoming EIR year. Thank you. Does that mean I can sit over there?
Thank you, Carol.
Thank you for joining us, Caroline. Okay. Consent calendar. Ray?
Yeah, I'd like to remove A, D, and F. And I saw a communication about C as well, and I guess I want to defer to Hal on that. Did you get that information, Hal?
Let's go ahead and remove it, and then...
And we can ask them then, okay.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
that leaves just B and E.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 All right, I'm going to start with A.
Before you do that, I forgot to put this on here. This is the correction to the Aston Street.
Okay, right.
Pick up the property.
The reason that I pulled it off. Thanks, Hal. Good catch. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so the reason that I wanted to look again before approving the minutes of October 1st is I felt on page 4 there were a couple of things that they could have been said a little more straightforward and therefore more clear. And I'm referring to paragraph 3 under Old Business A about the term sheet. And that paragraph says that Councilmember Miller explained that among other clarifications, the revised term sheet makes it very clear that it is non-binding and the rest is what I like to change. And that all the financial responsibility involved would be assumed by the developer, period. And this was a statement that I made. So. And that is what I said, and I think that makes it more clear than what is there now. And then further on down, the paragraph that begins with Mayor Lentz, next to last, and it says, indicated that Councilmember O'Connell expressed her desire to be present when, I think it would be more accurate if it said when action on the term sheet was considered. Because that's what she asked for. I mean, we talked about it, but we didn't take action. And that's what she wanted to be here when we voted. That makes sense to you?
That does.
Okay. Okay, so those are the two modifications I'd like to suggest for the minutes of October 1st. And if there are no others, I would move approval as amended.
Have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
And I'll abstain, as I was not present for that meeting.
All right. Item C.
Okay, you saw this exchange, Hal?
I saw an email raising a question about the fact that some closed sessions by the council may be conducted at other locations, and I guess my response to that would be this section only refers to the location of regular meetings.
Okay,
It does not govern closed sessions or study sessions or workshops or whatever. And I think it is important to specify a location, particularly since the TV equipment is here on your regular meetings. I would suggest you leave it as it is.
okay, leave as is, okay.
And the ordinance read 250 visitation before.
Yeah, the only change we made was the address. As far as the language of referring to regular meetings, that's in the existing code. So all we did was change the address here.
Right.
Okay. Do I have a motion?
I'll move approval of
Second?
Yeah, second.
All's in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Item D.
Okay, so item D is a simple one, and you want to explain how? Because you just given us the change.
Yeah, the subdivision map I was looking at did not clearly indicate that Lassen Street ran all the way up to Solano, or all the way down to Solano, I guess I should say. And Councilmember Miller correctly pointed out that that also is part of the pedestrian walkway. So the ordinance has been changed. Instead of referring to street it was referring to before, it now talks about going all the way from Humboldt to Solano Street. That's the only change that was made. So that whole area then would be designated as the pedestrian walkway. It'll still be a public right-of-way, but it'll be limited to pedestrian use only.
And that wasn't obvious before? I mean, what?
No, if you looked at the subdivision map, that part of the street, first of all, was not labeled,
Yeah.
and it actually looked wider. So it looked like it was a street in use, and it wasn't labeled as Lassen. Quite frankly, I thought that was an extension of Solano. I mean, if you just look at the recorded map, you'd think that there was a street running all the way down. So I should have Googled it and looked at pedestrian view.
Yeah, and actually kind of funny, because some people used to drive it, use a dirt path before it was turned into a walkway.
Yeah.
Right.
And back in the 60s, people would drive up it, but it was more as a challenge
Right.
type thing. Challenge
Motorcycles
drive.
in particular.
Yeah, but cars too.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
right, yeah.
It was a challenge drive.
But it was as a part of the street project in the 70s. It was made into the bicentennial walkway, which we all, I'm sure, have been on. So this just protects that use.
Yeah, if you went back to the original subdivision map, you probably can't see it from there, but it's actually thicker than the other portion of Solano, and if you looked at it, or of Lassen, so it looked like it was just an extension of Solano going down.
Right.
And not being familiar with that particular street, I didn't include that area.
Yeah, I'm just kind of curious, what was the thinking on bringing this, or the intent on bringing this forward right now?
I think it was simply to kind of make it very clear that this is not intended to be converted to a public street. So if anyone did want to seek access, even though there's nobody there now who needs it, they couldn't make a claim, well, I want to build a house here and then build a street, even if it's at my own expense, but I want to build a street through that right-of-way. We can, once we make a finding that it's no longer needed for vehicular traffic, essentially close it for that purpose. So I think it's more an insurance that that particular pedestrian walkway will always be devoted to that use, and nobody can come along later and claim a right of access for vehicular traffic. It's mainly to guarantee the continued use as it is now.
Well, I'm fine with it. I was just curious on the timing. Been that way for so
Well,
many
the
years.
timing was kind of dictated by whether or not there were properties along there that could argue that they needed it for access to their property. And that's all disappeared through, well, actually, you were part of that with the last purchase, yeah.
Yeah, we purchased that, yeah.
And that made it clear that that wasn't an issue anymore.
Right.
We might have been reminded of it by the fact that we just recently acquired some property in that area, kind of focus.
It just seems,
attention.
you're right, Clark. When I was reading this, it just seemed kind of odd since in reality, no one was going to be able to use it for, car access. So why go to the extra step and time
Because
to?
on the subdivision map, it still calls it a street, so.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I know.
Well, not only
Better that
street,
it's
it was dedicated on the map, and unlike our present practice, that dedication was actually accepted.
I know.
Yeah.
It really
Normally, we don't
changed
accept
the,
it until the
outcome.
street is in and improved.
It's been a stairway for as
Okay.
long as I've been in town, so doubt it's ever going to change,
Right.
whether, you do this or not, but, all right, so.
Okay, I would move approval of the amended form.
Second.
All's in favor?
All right.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, letter F.
Okay, this is this prepaid bond business, and I don't know, maybe the Administrative Service Director would like to just give us a quick rundown. I have just a couple of questions for clarification, maybe background, the questions would make more sense.
Sure. This is a issue BOSQA has, the San Francisco has done some capital projects on behalf of the system. BOSQA owes the money for those systems. So right now, we're currently paying 5.13% interest rate to San Francisco to pay off those capital projects over a period of time. If we went out for a municipal bond issue, we can get it closer in the 3% range. So by prepaying the bonds, we, as a BOSQA as a whole, could save money. There's the slight issue of that I mentioned in the staff report with Cal Water and Stanford being private agencies. They need to sell private. They cannot sell public debt. They need to sell private debt. That will raise the interest rates a little bit for that. The BOSQA board has looked at it and has determined to blend the rates between the private and the public sectors. The rationale that they used was that the private companies do not make a profit off of the operations side, so they would not make a profit off of this. So if they were to split the rate between the public and the private, it would be the customers of Stanford and Cal Water that would be paying the increased interest rate. It doesn't change everything very much. So they're blending the rate. We have two different water. We take water from them in two different fashions. One is from GVMID, one is from the city. So the way that BOSQA gave us the information was, for the city, we'll be saving between $1,934 a year to $3,288, depending on how the interest rates come. And then for GVMID, the savings will be $1,775 a year to $3,018. This will be about 1.4 to 2.4 cents overall in the rate. I don't expect the rates to go down because rates will continue to go up for other reasons. So it'll be subsumed in the other rate increases. Probably the most interesting aspect of this is how they're going to determine what a individual agency who uses water is going to pay. What they're going to do is they're going to charge based on the amount that you used last year and what overall percentage of the overall use of the water was based on last year, and then in the current year they're going to true up to how much water you use compared to how much water everybody else used. So if you were able to save water in a given year, next year's bond payment would be less than it was the year before. If you use the same percentage of water, as they had projected, you would be paying the same dollar amount, and the next year this takes this to a flat dollar amount that we'll be paying. I don't know if you need more background on that for the questions.
No, that sounds good for me.
Okay.
No, others have questions.
No, I don't.
So the fiscal implication is that the two agencies together, the city and GVMID, which are really one, save a certain amount of money, right?
Correct.
And which is over $6,000, right?
Right. It would be somewhere between $3,600 and $6,000, depending on what the ultimate interest rate
Right.
that they're able to get.
Right.
And that will be the savings to the water utility fund.
That's good. Okay, now this is the resolution,
Yes,
the resolved section.
okay.
Section 2, number B. That was a little confusing to me. It's certify the payment of the surcharge. This is from the city's water enterprise. Should that be fund? Is that what it's coming from? Am I right about that?
Yes,
Yeah. And then it says payable from the revenues of the city's water enterprise prior to the payment of obligations payable from the net revenues. So would you explain that difference there?
I could tell you this is language that they told us that we needed to pass in order for them to have their bond issue. So let me try and do my best.
Okay.
Because this is the same form that they've used for every other person. So what it would be is that this would be the first call on the money. So after you have paid for all of your basic expenses and you have your net revenue after that, so you'd have your revenue you come in, your gross revenue, then you'd have all your everyday expenses, then you would have net revenues, and then we would make the bond payment, and then if you have money left over, you would then be able to use it for capital, additional capital after that. So that's where, that's what they want to have. Yeah, they want to make sure that they have it before people pay for capital. And that would make sense because if we did not do this, it would just be part of your water rate, which would have been part of your cost of service.
Right. Okay. I get that. And then section 3, I guess this is more of a kind of a Hal question. It says here that all actions heretofore taken with respect to the prepayment of the bonds are hereby approved, confirmed, and ratified, blah, blah, and so forth. And it sort of is a overall, everything you've done is fine, but there's no provision for, unless, of course, there's some kind of fraud or negligence, what have you. That isn't there at all. And so I guess my question is to the city attorney, is there anything to worry about in that respect, just as a form?
Well, this is kind of standard language the bonding lawyers like to use, and I'm sure that's where it came from. I don't think that necessarily waives any misconduct. It's really ordinary actions by the employees or by the representatives, officers, whatever, are confirmed. If there was some technical action that needed some kind of a ratification, that's the intent of the paragraph. It is not intended as to absolve any public official from any act of wrongdoing. I would not read it that way.
Okay, that's what I wanted to find out. Thank you. Okay, that answers my questions. Thank you.
All right. So you want to make a motion? Unless you have a question.
I have a question. On the fiscal impact, it says that BOSQA advised the city it'd save between $19.34 and $32.88 per year, and the GVMID would save $17.75 to $3,018 a year. But am I looking at it wrong that is really saving the city between $3,675 and $6,400?
That's correct. It's because of the way that we do it. The way BOSQA looks at it is we have two different pipes coming off of it, one for GVMID and one for the city.
Right.
So when they look at it, they say what percentage of the overall water use does the city use and what percentage of overall water use does GVMID use. But when we do it as a city, we combine both into the same fund. So therefore, we would be saving the fund that combined amount either $3,700 a year or $6,200 a year. You're right on that.
But that's not reflected because BOSQA says it's going to save between $2,000 and $3,000 a year.
For the city's pipe. And then it would save between $2,000 and $3,000 a year for the GVMID pipe. They look at it as two separate agencies. We have combined it from accounting purposes into one fund.
So in the paragraph before, you only included Bosq's Brisbane amount, not
Correct.
the GVMID
Yes.
amount. Okay. And that if the extra percent in savings is about $30 for the blended rate,
Right.
you're saying that if it weren't a blended rate, we'd be paying about $30 less?
If it was, if we were to save 1%, and I don't know the difference between a private bond and a public debt and private debt, but for every 1% difference in those, we would save $30. If you take that there is a full 1% if you were to say that there was a 10% difference, if one was 3.5% and one was 3.8%, we would save $300. And I'm thinking that off the top of my head, and I'd have to check that, because I'm trying to do math off the top of my head, and I'm not quite sure I have that one right.
Okay.
But it would be a minimal savings if it was a non-blended rate. And the way the Bosco was looking at it, their board that reviewed it basically said that the difference in dollar amounts between the private and the public would not be so great as to cause a disservice to the users of Stanford and Cal Water, who would be paying all of the difference. And that was decided by the Bosco board.
Okay, because the entire rate difference, and thank you for letting us know, the 3% is the anticipated rate of sale from the 5.13.
Right.
So that's basically a 2% savings on this bond.
Correct.
So when you said there was a 1% change that would only give us $30 or $600, it just didn't make sense to me, but now I understand that that's just the portion of our portion of the blended rate.
Right.
So
I'm
that
sorry.
makes sense to me now. Thank you.
All right, do I have a motion for item F?
So move.
Second.
All's in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, public hearing, item A, consider introduction of ordinance number 566, amending chapter 16.12, tentative and final parcel maps, subdivision maps.
Thank you, Honorable Mayor, members of the council. I have several ordinances before you this evening. Draft 566 was previously considered in October, related to condominium regulation in the city's subdivision map act and zoning ordinance. A couple others on your agenda are 475 and 474. 574 and 575 later in this evening's meeting. They all relate to compliance with various provisions of the housing element in terms of provisions of the zoning ordinance, which we've committed to amend to primarily eliminate governmental restriction on development of housing. Also some clarification and cleanup of inconsistencies internally between the subdivision ordinance and the zoning ordinance, as well as to ensure that our local regulations are consistent with state MAP Act requirements. Again, in Ordinance 566, there were a number of items that were raised at the last hearing, technical items, and we're in the process of addressing those. In regard to 574 and 575, again, there's a lot of text revision involved in all these ordinances. They're somewhat technical in nature. And really we're asking tonight is for the council's direction as to how to proceed with these. We could just advertise, 566 is not ready to be heard this evening. We could continue that off calendar and re-advertise it when it's ready. 574 and 575 can be heard this evening if that's the council's pleasure. Or if the council would like to refer these off to either an ad hoc or a standing subcommittee to go through some of the technical issues that all these ordinances and amendments raise, That would be another approach, and then maybe the heavy lifting of the technical review could occur in that process, hopefully to facilitate the actual public hearing. The first one on 566 was quite lengthy. Last time we attempted this for 574 and 575, we didn't get to them on the agenda. The agenda was too busy. Tonight's a different circumstance, obviously, but it's really up to the council's pleasure whether you want to proceed with these ordinances or refer them off, have a subcommittee meeting to go over the substance and the detail, and then advertise them at that time. So I'll be willing to accept whatever input the council would like to offer at this point.
Yeah, if I may, so, John, when 574 and 575 were before the Planning Commission, those, were those two issues, did they involve quite a bit of Planning Commission time and engagement from the community?
Neither of those generated a lot of interest from the community. Neither did 566 for that matter.
Really?
But, you know, the commission did spend some time working through the details of the actual text language and the text, changes that were being proposed.
Okay. All right. Clerk, you have a question?
Just for the city attorney, just for item A, do we need a motion to extend that out? Because I don't think we opened the public hearing, or we did open the public hearing and it's still open. Do we need to extend it out to a further time without naming a date?
The recommendation from staff, since we don't know exactly when we'll be ready to bring it back, is simply to, drop it from the agenda now, and then we'll simply republish.
Okay.
When we get a new hearing date. You only need to extend to a date certain if you're continuing the existing public hearing, and we're not doing that.
All right.
So that's for 566?
Yeah. I think we can make it through the other two.
I think so,
I think
too.
we make 566 has got some deeper issues that I think
Right.
might warrant having the ad hoc subcommittee. So is that something that the council would like to entertain?
Yep.
Okay. So, Clay, do we form that ad hoc subcommittee now, or?
Well, I think probably we'll just put it on your next agenda to do so.
Okay.
That's the direction.
All right. That'll work. All right. So then the next item on the agenda is item B, which is consider introduction of ordinance number 574, amending chapter 16.12 tentative and final parcel maps and subdivision maps where required of the municipal code.
Members of the council, the city's current substandard lot provisions assume adjoining substandard lots that are in common ownership will be merged together to create standard building sites. For the city to initiate such mergers, the city's merger provisions must comply with State Subdivision Map Act procedures as set forth in Government Code Section 664-51 et al. The city's merger provisions, which were adopted in 1982, allowed a process to occur that the State Map Acts currently would not allow for. So the intent of this particular amendment is to bring the city's subdivision ordinance into compliance with the MAP Act. It would allow the council to merge adjoining lots under the same ownership if any one of the lots does not comply with applicable zoning standards, if at least one of the lots is undeveloped or only partially developed, and if at least one of the lots is less than 5,000 square feet in area or not created in compliance with applicable laws at the time. There are another provisions set forth in the government code that also need to be met to allow for the lots to be merged. Another section of the local ordinance would be amended to codify past standard practice by allowing a voluntary merger of lots by a property owner as opposed to the city having to initiate that process. Sometimes that is a speedier process, particularly if someone's awaiting to get a building permit that's contingent on such a merger to be achieved. Again, so staff is recommending that the council introduce ordinance 574 as presented, and I'm glad to answer any questions you might have.
All right. Any questions for John?
Yeah, just a couple of minor questions. It's pretty straightforward, I think. In the 1612-060 merger of parcels initiated by the city, I'm sure there's a reason for this, but it's not clear to me. All of the provisions and criteria and so forth I can't find a category for a lot which is just plain undeveloped.
If I get your question, provision 1 says at least one of the affected parcels is undeveloped by any structure. At
For
least
which a
one,
building permit was issued, right? And then.
For which a
and it
building
goes-
permit was
It's
issued.
always qualified.
yeah. But I
Doesn't
think it's
mean to-
qualified by at least, so it could be either, it could be both are undeveloped. And defer to the city attorney, but that's my read. It could be both lots are undeveloped as well.
You know, the way I read it, there's always some kind of restriction, so that there doesn't seem to be a category of just plain old undeveloped without any history of anything happening at all. They all seem to have some kind of qualifications. That's the way I read it anyway, and I'm just trying to figure out, am I reading it correctly, or is that the way it's supposed to be, or what?
If I understand the question, I think probably that's the way it's supposed to be, since under the state law, the requirements for merger are all dependent on defined physical circumstances and the condition of the lot. It could be undevelopable for any number of reasons that are not specified here. There could be some, geotechnic hazard or whatever. So I think all this is saying is that if you have a lot that has these characteristics, and the main one being one is of substandard size, can be merged with another one, and those physical characteristics are not necessarily dependent, other than size, on whether it can be developed or not. And there could be totally different reasons why it couldn't be developed. And I think we're kind of relying on other regulations of the city to deal with those.
Okay, it's just a question. I just couldn't find that category, and I thought there's got to be a reason for that. Yeah. And I had just one other question. I noticed that when the city takes this initiative, it comes directly to the council rather than through the planning commission. I guess what's the reason for that?
Again, this procedure is what is set forth in the State MAP Act.
Okay.
So it's state law sets that forth.
Okay, that answers that.
So, any other questions for staff?
Yes, I do.
Okay, sir.
When will this be applied? Is this intent, I see that the intent is to encourage infill housing opportunities, but it looks to me that, or it appears to me, that this actually, when would this be triggered? Are we going to look at every substandard lot in Brisbane and say, we want it merged so that we have these opportunities? Are we going to initiate this process, or is this just to put this process in place? And when would we initiate these kind of processes? Is when we think there's going to be some action on a property, or do we do it in advance of an action on a property?
The typical procedure is usually driven by a property owner who is obligated to merge their parcels so they can obtain a permit, a building that's going to cross both lot lines. And the city's procedures we need to have in place, we need to have procedures in place to allow even voluntary mergers to occur. I would suspect most will occur on a voluntary basis. It may be that we identify parcels that, from a city policy standpoint, we believe require merging sort of proactively in advance of any development proposal. And that could be valuable in terms of for ownership. Someone buys property and they have an expectation what their development rights might be, and if their parcels are merged, that might change what that is. So there could be value of doing that, but in practice, I wouldn't expect that we'll be looking to find these sites and merge them. Primarily, this is a vehicle for a property owner to be able to consolidate and actually move forward with infill development.
I understand that that's sort of the the thought process that goes behind this, but it seems to me that this would make it, because they put dates on when, if the properties were co-owned or owned by the same owner as of a certain date, then these apply. And so I'm not sure how we set the precedent of when we initiate this or not initiate it. I see that it comes to the council, but I'm just not clear on why this wouldn't apply to every substandard parcel that we have in Brisbane and be triggered by this change in our code.
I think you raise a very good point in terms of, again, in my time here, which is not that lengthy, 7 years or so, I'm not aware that the city has initiated such a case in the time I've been here. Hal may have some other recollections to that regard. And again, I think an important couple words, may initiate it, and to the council. So staff would be bringing that forward. Like any other action, you would be evaluating the basis for your decision, and staff would be, having to justify that particular action in that particular case. And again, if it was council direction that a work program to merge these parcels on a more aggressive basis were considered of council direction or council policy, that's certainly something a council could in the future do. But if in terms of a staff level, we would not be looking to merge lots that aren't under development consideration.
So in your theory, it's more that until someone takes a hard look at a property to see if these conditions exist, by an initiation of the property owner, that it hasn't been done in the past. It seems that, to me, if the intent is to encourage new infill housing, we'd want to make sure that we had less, not more, non-conforming lots. And so if we were to, let's say, get a high RHNA number that we are encouraged by the state to have buildable lots and have sites that could have multifamily dwellings, that this would be something that could help us change the outlook and the lots that are in Brisbane to be able to be proactive on achieving those numbers. And I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I think that it's something to look at the effect, and even if, and it may be that it's just in the wording, in the, in how we could word it, that we don't want to be initiating these for, against the will of the people or the property owner.
Adding to what John said, in the time I've been here, which is considerably longer, I'm not aware of any situation in which the city has initiated an involuntary merger. I think the main purpose of this ordinance, first of all, we've always had a merger ordinance on the books. State law has always provided for a merger. It has gone in different directions. Many years ago, there was a state law that kind of mandated a merger. That created all kinds of chaos, and that law was reversed to make it voluntary again, or at least requiring some action on the part of the city. I think the main purpose of this ordinance is to bring our ordinance into compliance with the state law. It certainly does not reflect an intent to initiate a program of the city running around trying to look for merger opportunities. It usually arises when a property owner wants to do something and the city then says, well, we'll allow a development, but you need to merge these parcels. I think the main feature of the state standards for merger is that there is always some form of nonconformity or some form of problem with the lot that restrains or even prohibits development of the merged parcel. Either it's too small, or it's got geotechnic problems, or it, among the other things, there's slope instability, there's no legal access. So the bottom line is there's always something wrong with the parcel to be merged, either in terms of size or condition. And this is simply defining in more detail the circumstances under which the city can insist that that parcel be merged, and really to deny a property owner the opportunity to come in, or the ability to come in and claim a right to develop a parcel that really is not suitable for development and should be merged with the adjacent parcel if it's under common ownership. But we've never had a program of running around looking for merger opportunities.
No, I understand that, but it does give you many opportunities with this because it says at least one of the deficiencies. And I can't imagine that any property that isn't developed yet doesn't have at least one of these issues. And so my other question is, can you explain what does not meet current standards for sewage disposal and domestic water supply? That phrase, can you give?
I think basically the utilities are not available. It really has in mind a parcel of land that has no water or sewer utilities running to it, and that cannot be provided. I'm not sure that applies to any of the properties in Brisbane, but there are some communities where you have no water or sewer.
Okay.
Well, yeah, I'd say the Upper Hillside would qualify for that. If we had any small lots up there, if you did to the Brisbane Acres area. Now, those are all larger lots, but assuming hypothetically that there was a small parcel that we wanted to merge with a larger parcel, none of the properties up there have water or sewer, so they would qualify under that standard.
And then when we get into the ordinance itself, and it says that you only need, only one of the conditions need to exist, and they don't need to be less than 5,000 square feet. Because it can be many other reasons that it needs to be merged.
But
We look at item 2 on page 6. Is that it? The size of the parcel isn't in effect until item A?
there is a precursor, I guess, to that. It was saying that any of the parcel does not conform to the applicable zoning ordinance. So if you're looking at lots over 5,000 square feet, you're typically going to be complying with the zoning ordinance for residential zoning, R1 zoning. So you wouldn't be kicked into being a non-conforming condition unless you were less than 5,000 square feet.
Okay. And then item F, that would include development would create health or safety hazard. Would that be in violation of applicable codes? Is that only, would fire or toxins trigger that?
No, I think health and safety is a broader term than that. I think they've deliberately made it very broad, so there could be some other health or safety regulation that's being violated, not just toxics.
And do we need to, is the language of the, that this is governed by the planning director, a problem if we don't have a planning director, or does the overriding title cover that?
Where are you looking?
Everything that is listed is acknowledged by the planning director, initiated by the planning director. Do we need a different title there, or can our,
Because we
corrected.
technically call it a community
Yeah,
development
no,
director.
we use the term planning director throughout our municipal code, so I don't think that's a problem.
okay,
Yeah, it's really just referring to the director of community development.
okay, as long as that's clear. That's my questions on this one.
Okay, Clark?
Hal, I just wanted to ask you, I know this is kind of tightening up the language, I guess, to conform with state law, but, and this is an existing ordinance, but would it be appropriate to put the intention of the modification up above? You know, I know we've done that in the past, and we've kind of gotten away from it, and this is an existing ordinance, it's just changing the language. I'm thinking maybe the intent of the language change in this ordinance, you know, is due to the fact of,
Just a recital indicating intent.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. We can add that in.
And I'm just thinking of just adding that in, so that way it just kind of makes clear what the intent is, and, you know, kind of helps, you know, if there's, you know, somebody has an old one, well, it used to say this, or, you know, and, you know what I'm saying, just for clarity purposes, and I think it's simple, and we don't have to go back and rehash it.
Yeah, it does give very broad, this ordinance gives very broad powers to the city council to
Yeah.
initiate
Merger.
perhaps unwanted mergers.
Yeah, and I think the intent is where the spirit of it, you know, and so you don't kind of get away from it. And we've done that in ordinances that were new, and this one's been an existing one, and I just think it kind of helps, you know.
Yeah, we can do that, and just to clarify, this is simply clarifying a power you already have, so,
Yeah.
and I think it's defining it in a better way.
Well, it's
So right
very,
now-
very broad power.
I think it's even
Very broad
broader as it
power.
is right now, so in
Yeah.
that respect,
Yeah.
it's kind of narrowing it down a bit.
So it doesn't say that it's giving us the further power to do merger, but what we're trying to do is really comply with the law.
Correct.
Yeah. Guess with that, Mr. Mayor, I'm ready to open the public hearing unless somebody else has.
Okay. Do you need a motion to open
No.
it up? Okay.
No, not to open.
Caroline, did you want to say anything in regards to that?
Hmm?
Thank you.
Motion to close public hearing?
Okay.
Second.
All's in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any further discussion, or will we entertain a motion?
I'd like to entertain a motion to introduce ordinance number 474,
Second?
amending chapter 16.12, the tentative and final parcel maps of the subdivision maps.
I think it's 574,
What did I say?
474.
574 then, sorry.
It's okay.
Thank you,
All those
Jerry,
in
for
favor?
pointing that out.
All
Aye.
in favor?
Aye.
Been one of those Freudian slips.
Then, on the next one,
474 was actually a squadron I was in. Somehow that number stuck in my head.
in regards to ordinance number 575, so I own a vacant lot. I think with the lot line adjustment, it would be 5,000 square feet, but it would not be 100 by 50. And what you're dealing with here is kind of making adjustments for things like that. So do I need to recuse myself? I have no
City
problem.
attorney question.
No problem doing it. I could probably use a break.
So you're saying this ordinance would affect your lot specifically?
It would.
Yeah, it probably wouldn't be a bad idea then, I think.
Okay. All right, Ray, I warmed it up for you. So you can move over. Okay.
So, Don, you want to give a introductory?
Yes, thank you. Again, this is another ordinance amendment that's related to various provisions associated with both the subdivision ordinance and the zoning code, again, driven by the housing element. Again, they're I'd say probably, I'll just kind of break it into several categories of activity. One relates to amending the zoning ordinance provisions to comply with the lot line adjustment procedures we just discussed in Ordinance 574. So I won't get into those. And again, this actually does address that idea that Hal brought up of being maybe less restrictive and more accommodating in the sense of allowing lot lines of substandard lots to be adjusted without having to fully comply with applicable district regulations, as long as the existing degree of noncompliance is not increased. So that is actually probably giving property owners a little more latitude than our current ordinance has. And then that also is consistent with state law requirements. So that's one set of adjustments related to lot line adjustments. Another set of amendment related to dwelling groups. And dwelling groups are 2 or more detached buildings, which are permitted as conditional uses in the R2 and R3 districts, whereas attached units are permitted by right. These detached units require a conditional use permit. A recommendation of staff and the Planning Commission was to allow detached units by right, same as you would an attached unit. So the provisions would be the same instead of sending detached units through a conditional use permit process, allowing detached units by right the same way you would with attached units. So that's the modification related to dwelling groups. We have substandard lots, and again, this relates to defining substandard lot as having an area, depth, or width that does not comply with applicable zoning standards, and modifying that on some very specific sites, which are identified in the staff report. There's some lots on Lake Street, and then some additional lots on San Benito Road, where due to their configuration and size, for example, they meet the lot size configuration, the lot size, but they don't meet all the configuration standards, lot width, depth. And so these changes would allow for those lots to be developed without going through a variance procedure. So again, those are outlined in the staff report.
Yeah, actually, if I could, John, that was probably a typo on the address. I think it was 195.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I just happened to, I thought I was familiar with the site because a number of years ago we had I don't know if they still own it, but it was a couple of brothers that owned it, and they wanted to subdivide it, and one of them was an attorney, and actually felt bad for the guy because we couldn't do it because our ordinance didn't allow for it, and it really was a developable lot. It really was kind of a lot. I think that really falls in this category. So, so that was 195. That was actually in the Planning Commission minutes.
Okay, thank you all.
And I did see I thought it was 197, but yeah, I think it was 195.
I'll correct that.
But
the basic provision still applies, and that one, I think there is, again, some case law that speaks to the city's previous regulations may not be consistent with that Supreme Court decision of 1994.
Right.
So again, the 4 lots in San Benito, and then another modification to lot width and depth standards. There are provisions in the subdivision ordinance that allow for property to be split into sites that meet the minimum lot area standard, even if they don't meet the minimum lot width and depth standards. So the intent of the ordinance is to add a process to the zoning ordinance that is reflective of that subdivision ordinance requirements. So again, if the subdivision ordinance has a more streamlined procedure, the zoning ordinance requires a fairly rigorous and onerous variance process. So the intent of that provision is to bring the 2 ordinances somewhat into alignment, instead of having one set of rules under the subdivision ordinance and another set under the zoning ordinance. So try to bring those into alignment. And then lot mergers, Also, we discussed previously is to again bring the ordinance into compliance with what we just discussed in the previous case. So with that, I apologize for the sort of the length of these ordinances and the number of changes, but I'd be glad to entertain any questions. Staff is recommending approval of or introduction of ordinance 575 as was recommended by the Planning Commission.
Okay, thanks. Questions?
I had well, I'm not sure this really applies, kind of a hypothetical scenario if, I guess, and it's just rolling around. I'm not even sure. And if a person owned a 7,500 square foot lot and they had a house built on a 2,500 square foot portion of it only, and there was a 5,000 square foot parcel open, could they subdivide that? If it was even deemed as one parcel, even though it's 3 lots, 3 2,500 square foot lots. And
I don't think that would be a candidate under these provisions. That wouldn't really accommodate, in my mind, it wouldn't really accommodate a situation like that, because again, the lot size requirements are still what they are. If this was, an R1 type zone, you'd be creating, even though functionally it appears like a 2,500 square foot lot, is still, one home on 7,500 square feet, and functionally to create a substandard parcel of 2,500 square foot would be inconsistent with the zoning requirements.
okay.
The only situation in which I can imagine that maybe happening is if it was all merged together and the property that was already built met the requirements for a second unit, then it would be possible.
So it'd have to be in R2 maybe, or?
No, it could be an R1.
R1, yeah.
You wouldn't necessarily have to subdivide it, though, to build that second
have to subdivide.
unit. Exactly.
Okay, yeah.
I make a motion to introduce ordinance 575.
Well, we've got
We
to
have to
open
have
the
the-
public hearing.
Oops.
Public hearing
I
and
still have some
and
questions.
other questions. too.
Oops.
Yeah.
So on the dwelling groups section, when you explain the dwelling groups, and basically you're talking about clustered development in the R2 and 3 districts, is that correct? Do those units have the right to secondary units? If we make them permitted instead of conditional?
I'd have to double check, but no, I don't believe that a duplex or a dwelling group has a allowance. That's my recollection is a single family zone provision, not an R2 or R3. It would just be considered an extra unit associated with the density. You could have as many units as the density for the underlying zone would allow, but you can't have a secondary unit or a.
But this says dwelling groups in the R2 and 3 district.
The only difference between a dwelling group and, again, not having the history here, why it was decided to treat detached, if you had 2 units on an R2 lot, and why it was deemed appropriate to treat them differently if they were attached as a duplex, with a common wall, versus you detaching them and having 2 standalone units. That's really what we're discussing. It doesn't increase the density in any fashion. It's a matter of that form of that development. Because right now the rules say if you provide those as 2 detached structures, you have to go through a conditional use permit. If you build them with a common wall and attach them, then it's allowed by right. So it's really the difference of is there a material issue that required that by detaching the units, just by virtue of you detaching them from each other, whether there's a a need to go through a conditional use permit process, as opposed to if you just attach them, and then you would be allowed to do it by right. It doesn't get into increasing the density in any manner. It's the same number of units allowed. It's whether they're attached or detached and whether they should be treated the same or different.
But wouldn't they, in theory, be treated differently because the thought would be if you have, two homes, 2 units that are attached, that they've got a nexus between them. And if they're detached, then someone later could come and say, a brother and a sister own this, we want to make them separate properties. We don't talk anymore. And so that would change how their connectivity is and their saleability.
Since you're not creating separate lots, I don't believe it, and I'll let the city attorney speak to this, I don't think it would give anybody any more rights for disposing their property. When you have a single underlying parcel and you have 2 units on it, whether they're attached or detached, I don't believe there's any legal advantage or disadvantage created one way or the other, but I'll defer to the city attorney.
It's really going to depend on how it's organized. You could have 2 attached units that are sort of like a duplex or a condo. Each is a separate parcel of land, and each can be separately conveyed. If you have 2 units on a single parcel of land, then essentially you've got, you can't separate the parcels. It really depends on how the legal title to the 2 units is structured. Whether you've got 2 units on one chunk of land or you've got 2 units on 2 separate legal parcels.
Okay, and so the dwelling groups, if they're on a single parcel, they all have to be under a single ownership unless they go to condominium
You
style,
might have a condominium that's on a single parcel, correct?
because then the property is owned by the condominium association or the
units themselves
party.
would be individually owned, and then the common areas would be owned by the condominium association, that's correct.
And then on the section about on the staff report about lot mergers, it assumes that adjoining substandard lots that are in common ownership will be merged together to create standard building sites. And that refers back to 574 that we just introduced, and to my concerns about the intent to do that before this applies. So does this ordinance come after that ordinance? And so this would be the status that the city wants to make sure that before this applies, the lot mergers have taken place?
If the question, and maybe I'm misinterpreting the question, is the premise, the underlying premise that the city's policy is to encourage lots, substandard lots, to be consolidated to form more standard building sites. As far as I understand, that was an underlying premise under the code prior to any of these ordinances being introduced. As the city attorney pointed out, these ordinances are intended to bring our procedures into compliance with state law. But in terms of the underlying provision of the zoning code is to reduce nonconformity, not encourage non-conforming development as a rule, and that's kind of embedded throughout the zoning code. In various provisions, you don't allow substandard lots, or you don't allow encroachments into setbacks and whatnot by right. For if they're non-conforming, you still have to go through some procedures to increase your level of non-conformity. So I don't think that's any new ground in terms of policy direction that this is pointing out.
Thank you.
I have just, I guess, 2 questions. On the lot line adjustments section, submittal requirements, says the property lines indicated shall be obtained from existing recorded maps. Now, what's the relationship between existing recorded maps and city rights of way? Since we've dealt with that issue quite a bit recently.
Which provision you're?
It's 1632-020, submittal requirements, A.
Again, I think the intent is to not put individuals to the expense of a survey. If there are record maps that actually indicate the pre-existing lot conditions, that's the intent, is to.
But the reason I ask is that there's sometimes, at least we've been told anyway, by some property owners, that there's a conflict between recorded maps that they have and what the city has as the right-of-way for the streets. And then the question becomes, if there's a perceived conflict, you know, what prevails? And this basically seems to say the existing recorded maps. And so I'm wondering if we need to qualify that, or does it mean something else and it's not a problem?
Again, I think in practice, if there are questions regarding underlying legal lot status, we'll typically work with the city engineer to determine what we consider to be, at a staff level, considered to be acceptable base mapping.
Yeah, I just don't want to get ourselves into a corner, that's it.
The right-of-way will not determine the boundary line of a lot.
Okay,
In fact, you could have a public right-of-way that overlaps
right,
a lot.
right,
So the actual lot ownership could extend out into the street,
right,
and it's subject to the right-of-way. So
right.
we use the lot lines for purposes of determining lot line adjustments. And those adjustments could be totally separate from where the right-of-way is located. Now, that section also requires that the drawing identify where the rights-of-way are.
Right.
Because for all practical purposes, the property owner can't use that area,
Right,
even though the lot line may extend beyond it. So in determining the lot line adjustment, it becomes important to determine how much of the adjusted lot is going to actually be usable. And
Right.
if there's a right-of-way that encroaches on it, then that would have a bearing on evaluating the application.
right. That's exactly what I was
Yeah.
asking about. And so I just want to make sure that this language makes what you just said clear to whomever looks at this and thinks that they may have some right that we're not thinking about.
No, I think we would go by the location of the lot line, which is usually shown by a map.
Okay, okay. So you're comfortable with the,
Yes.
okay. In the staff report, it says that the dwelling groups in the R3 would still be subject to design permit approval, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so where does it say that? Or do we have that?
I'd have to go, I can look online for the zoning, I mean, the design, that's out of the,
Separate place?
in the design section, yes,
Okay, that's
design
a separate
permits.
location, so we wouldn't have that in this packet here. Okay. And then just one other question in the general use regulations. Under section B, modification in conjunction with application of a tentative map. I was just reading that, and I just wanted you to say what situation would this be and what would then qualify for a tentative map, because the flexibility that the Planning Commission is given in this circumstance is pretty broad, as I read it. So what would qualify for a tentative map? That's for a subdivision, and it would be of a certain size, right?
A subdivision of into five or more parcels.
5 or more, right, okay. And you're comfortable with this language here? It seems pretty open-ended.
Again, there's any decision that the commission would make would have to be based on written findings. And we're comfortable that the findings should clearly, draw the line between the decision they make and the intent and the language of this ordinance. So yes, the findings requirement sort of ties their action.
Okay, all right, that's good. So any other questions before we open the public hearing?
I would just make the same suggestion about putting the intent on this one to modify that so for
Yeah, I think that's a good
clarification
idea.
purposes. Yeah,
Right, okay.
I'm ready to open public hearing.
So we open the public hearing, and one member of the audience who happens to be a planning commissioner, as we've heard earlier.
Motion to close it?
Yeah.
Second.
I want to make one comment in the public hearing and to thank the planning commission for the amount, and the, planning staff for the amount of work that's gone into this. Clearly, it's a lot of detailed work and not exactly fun stuff, but it really needs to be done, and so I think we're appreciative of that. Okay, so I had a motion to close the public hearing,
And a second.
and a second.
Yep.
Oh, you want to say something? Okay, so we won't act on the motion yet.
I can only speak for myself, but I did find that the section you were speaking of seemed a little open-ended to me, but we felt that with the guidance of the planning department, that really we were confined with what we could do. So if you also find that a little open-ended, then I would feel very comfortable if the council looked at that more carefully, because I found it a little open-ended. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we have a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Okay. Any further council discussion before we introduce it?
Make a motion to introduce it?
Okay. We have
Second.
a motion and a second to introduce ordinance 575. And any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And maybe, John, you could make us all feel a little bit more comfortable with all the protections we have in the section that we were just talking about?
In terms of the finding requirements?
Yeah, right. Yeah. 'Cause I think that's probably the key. Not right at this section, not this moment, I meant,
Okay. Yeah,
eventually, send us a little note or something.
okay, we can do that.
Appreciate it. And that way, we're comfortable that, okay, we got that.
And,
Or
so-
we, actually pass it, or bring it up when we actually.
Okay, for the second reading, absolutely, okay.
We could have the mayor come back in.
Okay, hey, Mr. Mayor. We're ready for you.
Watching in the back room, having a
Yeah,
beer.
Wendy went, yeah, right.
Okay.
We didn't give him his 5-minute notice.
Finishing dinner. We're under staff reports, Cliff.
Yep. I would figure you wouldn't go ahead of me while I was away. Okay. Clay?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple of items. One is, we had a item on your agenda, I believe, 3 weeks ago, with regards to various issues surrounding street safety, parking, and pedestrian access. I had originally, at that meeting, indicated that we would bring that back this evening, but due to workload issues and the need to just kind of have further kind of internal discussions, I wasn't able to get it ready for tonight. So it will be coming back to you. I just want you to feel comfortable that it will be coming your way in the near future, but it'll probably be another meeting or two before we get back to that.
Okay.
The second item is just a report on the Baylands notice of appropriations. We have posted on our website all the responding agencies or individuals, and as of that period of time ended on last Wednesday, I believe. And the agencies that responded to date or through that period of time were the Bayshore Sanitary District, the California Department of Fish and Game, Bay Conservation Development Commission, California State Lands Commission, the San Francisco Public Utility Commission, the California High-Speed Rail Authority, Kinder Morgan, Dana Dilworth, citizen of Brisbane, and the Brisbane City Council, and also the City of Daly City. And all of those letters are on our website, so you can access them there, or any member of the public can access them there. The last or second to last item is that we had hoped to have the grand opening with regards to the playground project on this Sunday. That's not going to be possible now. There are a few construction issues and also some concerns over a storm that is anticipated to come in the middle of this week. Right. So we're going to have to push it out. I don't really want to give you a date at the moment because I don't think we have that really tied down firm. But it's probably a couple weeks, but certainly within the month of December, we'll be able to have that grand opening. And we'll certainly let you know as far ahead of time as possible on that. It'd be great if everybody could attend that. And then the final item, and I can probably rely upon council members Conway and Richardson to help me on this one, but we did have a meeting with Samtrans last Wednesday, primarily around the issue of the Route 292 and the objections that we've raised and others have raised with regards to that. The meeting really focused mostly on process as opposed to any substantive issues with relative to a change in recommendation. They assured us that they were hearing from our constituents and South San Francisco constituents and Daly City constituents. There will be a revised recommendation called a final draft that will be published in January. That is not a promise that the recommendation on 292 will change, just that it will go into a final draft form. And then we'll have approximately 30 days to comment on that. The board is not anticipated to take action until probably March. And the implementation date or implementation of the various route changes probably is a 6-month to a year process, depending on the route and various things that are involved in that. We certainly got, well, I'll speak for myself, certainly got the impression in that meeting and then other kind of more private conversations I had with the executive director, Mike Scanlon, that they're hearing us and that they're going to be responsive to the things that they've heard. However, we don't know what that is at this point, and certainly we don't have any promises with regards to that. So there's a need for, I think, to continue to keep the pressure. And I know Councilwoman Richardson has been talking to a number of members of the board, and I know that the three of you, Mayor Lentz and Councilmember Conway and Richardson, also attended the board meeting last or a couple weeks ago. So I think we're doing our all-out effort to try to get their attention on this, and I think we just need to stay vigilant over the next few months as the decision time comes on this. Mm-hmm. So with that, I'll turn it over to the council members if there's anything further on that you wish to say.
I can just say that my efforts have been very strong in getting the right people to come to the table. At the same time, they were, again, I said that at the last meeting, they were quite surprised with the number of calls and input from people that they have received. They had a chart, a bar graph, and it showed how other cities had responded to various things, and it showed this Route 292, the bar just went up all the way. It really looked like somebody's holding a stick up. It was just very powerful. That I think I'm really confident that something good is going to happen of this. Collectively, we've done a great job in this.
Yeah, I'm feeling really good about it as well.
one of the things they were saying, though, is what they're looking at is some of the routes that are running down El Camino. They have to look at not just this as its own autonomous route, but they would have to go back and relook at everything else on how it's going to stack up, because the way they were original recommendation in the draft, and the original draft showed the elimination of it during a separate day, and then there would be more runs down El Camino, which doesn't serve Brisbane at all, but serves the Mid-Peninsula, to San Francisco. So they would have to go back and reshuffle things, and so how that all pans out is to be determined, but they're the ones that initiated this meeting after Cliff and I went down there right after the meeting. They, poked at us out in the hallway and initiated this, so.
Actually, that's not quite the case.
Yeah, well.
Yeah, I was very involved behind the scene.
Okay, well,
It wasn't right after you guys talked.
well, they approached me after the meeting.
They have
I should
approached
say.
me the same
Okay.
time, yes.
I don't know. No, but great job, you guys, for getting the word out. And also to Caroline, and she got us the information, and then it was up to us to go out and make the calls, and, that's how you do it. That's how you get change, when you reach out to the folks that make the decisions. So, all right, any other subcommittee reports?
I can give
Councilmembers.
something that I had on CMAC meeting, Congestion Management Environmental Group, which is part of the CCAG. And county has this Green Business Program certification program that they want to reactivate. It's been dormant. And what they do is they're focusing on small to medium-sized businesses that would like to be certified as green businesses. And they have prepared some checklists that covers energy efficiency, water conservation, waste reduction, and pollution prevention. And when they go through this program, they would get certification. And some people are demanding this from businesses, and the county and, of course, CCAG is implementing this. And what's going to require is to have cities to pay $5,000 annually to this program. And there was some receptiveness to this, but some of the questions that we had, have they talked to Chamber of Commerce businesses to see how many businesses are interested? And questions about, have they talked to the city managers from each city to know if this is something that cities want and so forth? And it looks like that, yes, they have approached various chambers, and they've talked to the city managers group. And I would not speak on behalf of the city manager, but it seems that they want to support it. So if there are voluntary businesses that want to be certified as green, they would have the opportunity to do so. And I think it's a very good thing to do for $5,000 a year. It's a go for me.
Well, if we can get more information on it.
Yeah, I have I have this information, but I'm sure a letter is going to be coming out.
They're sending a letter through the
Yes.
city manager's offices, and I think it's probably being timed to a 2013, 2014 budget
Yes.
allocation.
Exactly, it's
We'll
part
bring
of
it
that.
forward in that process for you.
Yes.
All right.
We had a CCAG meeting too, and I for some reason, I thought we talked about it, but maybe not.
No,
With the airport land use plan.
The one that had missing pages?
Yeah,
You did talk.
oh, yeah, you took,
yeah, and there was another part on the agenda too. They talked about the global climate action plans
Right.
that cities are doing. And I remember this coming before the council.
Right.
But we're one of the few cities that hasn't requested money on doing that, and I forget what the reason is. I thought that they had some inadequate criteria or something that wasn't really.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I remember that, and actually, the recommendation came from Fred Smith. Because what they essentially wanted to have produced was a plan with a whole lot of future emission reduction targets. And a lot of data collecting in order to do that, because how do you know that you've reduced your emissions if you don't have a lot of data collection? And the staff felt that this was a pretty expensive thing, especially when, 75 to 80% of the emissions generated in Brisbane come from one source, Bayshore Freeway, over which we have, zero control. And so the proposal was that we do something different than what's being done in a lot of the other cities, which we think are pretty pie-in-the-sky targets anyway, that we really come and produce our own energy conservation program, which the council instructed the Open Space and Ecology Committee to come back with eventually, and they've been working on that. And so that's kind of what the council instructed the committee to do. And so our replacement, it's basically our climate action plan is the, Brisbane Energy Plan.
Yeah, because I remember, I was looking at it kind of chuckling. I couldn't remember specifically, but I'm looking at all these cities that are like, about as environmental as a jar of oil.
I mean, we looked at, I think it was Burlingame, and they had a committee, and they put together this wonderful plan with a consultant that somebody paid for. They had all these, fancy targets and emission reductions and so forth. There's no plan how to do it. It's just a set of, wonderful objectives with no real implementation plan. So
no teeth. Yeah.
It's one of those things that it just didn't seem a terribly good use of our resources, the way it has been established so far.
We had Economic Development Subcommittee.
We did.
And, geez.
We had Alan Brooks from running.
Oh, yeah, that was it, yeah.
So Alan,
Go ahead.
so Alan is, he has this company. It's event planning, event coordination company, but they also work with different companies to create brand awareness, to help them market themselves in other areas. One of the companies that they work with is a microbrewery in Indiana. It's called Three Floyds. And Three Floyds is thinking of expanding their business. They're looking at a place perhaps on the West Coast, and they're quite interested in Brisbane, on the industrial park. So, so I think there's some potential there. One of the things that Three Floyds does in Indiana, in this little town called Munster, Indiana, is that they put on a festival every year. And right now the festival is at about 6,000 people.
Seems to be in the wintertime too, or?
It wasn't in the summer, yeah. And so, and it was interesting, how, this came about, and we were at the the California Cities Conference, and we both sat in on this one session where the economic development director of Vista was talking about how they started working with microbreweries in their town, in their industrial park, and how they went from 1 to 2, and now they have, I think, about a dozen. And now they're the hub of microbrewery in the San Diego region. And it's bringing, lots of money, stimulating their economy, and, not just, with new jobs, but providing financial gain for the local merchants in the area. So, we'll keep you abreast of how things go with that, and it just also just kind of looking at economic development from the event perspective.
Go ahead.
And we had one other meeting prior to that one too, that was putting together our initial plan to present to the council. And that should be coming forth, in January, February, somewhere in there?
Well, we'll have to, we haven't quite set up the workshop calendar yet, but it'd be sometime in the, early part of the year.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, taking the feedback from the council, you know, in, yeah, you know, in coming up with an economic development plan that, you know, doesn't take away from the general fund, because I know we're all concerned about our finances right now, but still, you know, keeping an eye on how do you create opportunities to bring in money. And so, you know, sometimes it's hard to make money without investing money, but we're working on it. And I think, you know, some of the ideas that Alan brought to the table, you know, might do that. So.
Yeah, I did have something else. That if you remember, I think a year or 2 years ago, citizens passed Measure M, that they pay $10 for registration when they registered their cars. Before that, we had $4 per registration. And that $4, all the funds that they were collected, was distributed 25% for stormwater pollution, 25% for congestion, and again, 25% for countywide storm and congestion management. All the funds have been allocated and spent, and there is $900,000 that is left from the $4 DMV fees collected. They have a technical advisory committee, and the technical advisory committee went and distributed these funds with the different formulas to the cities and counties. The good thing about it is that the new allocation give the small cities more money, because before they would just go based on the population you had. Now they're adding population and miles. So City of Brisbane is going to end up getting about 21,000. And what they're going to do with these really is to install plug-in electric charging stations all throughout the county. And I think this is really substantial, and this is really wonderful. Can you imagine if we end up having our own plug-in station in Brisbane? I think this is remarkable, and there are anticipation that this is going to become so big that other car companies might come and give incentives to have, for cities to have plug-in stations. One of the concerns that was raised, all these plug-in stations are during the business operation, while the electric use is at the highest. So why don't they have them after the hour? So some of this conversation is taking place, but I'm really excited to know that there are efforts in encouraging electric cars.
Yeah, that's cool. Thank you, Seppi.
Yep.
All right, any other council matters? Okay, so next on to oral communications. Okay. I will take a motion to adjourn to our workshop.
In memory of.
Oh, yes, in memory of
Donnie McClyman.
Donnie McClyman. Yeah, you know, and before we leave, I mean, you know, Donnie, you know, I know you all saw Randy Burrows', you know, pretty touching letter, you know, to all the staff, you know, about Donnie. And, you know, I mean, Donnie was, I mean, boy, he's been a fixture in Brisbane for years and years, and you know, working in the Public Works Department. And, you know, he was only 53 years old, and he was 2 years away from retiring. And, yeah, it's hard when, you know, someone who's worked, you know, really hard for the city, and, you know, they're so close to retiring and enjoying that, you know, that life after, you know, putting in all those days of work, and then, you know, that type of tragedy happens. But, I mean, you know, he's been involved with so many things in town, you know, kind of like how we talk about Public Works. You know, they work from behind the scenes a lot, and they don't get that recognition. But you know, he's touched, you know, so many of us in so many different ways, and he's definitely going to be missed. So, all right. Let's move on to our other, or continuing our
So moved.
original meeting. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.